Our Meet the Candidates night from the staff, Matt and Sylvia, and my name is Tom Seidel, and I am the moderator for this candidate forum. If anyone has connections or setup issues, it would be good to either raise your hand or make a note in chat, and either Matt or Sylvia can give you a hand with that. So here's the format for this evening as we go through meeting our candidates. First, the mayoral and council candidates will have their own separate introductions, questions, and closing statements. For each candidate, they will have 2.5 minutes for an introduction, 1.5 minutes for a response to a question, and then a closing statement of 2.5 minutes. The timing you will be able to see here and also will be monitored by the staff and the moderator. The mayoral candidates will have 60 minutes total, which will average out about 30 minutes for each person. And the council candidates will have 90 minutes total, which again will average out to about 30 minutes for each candidate. Each candidate pool will answer as many questions as possible within that time period. I've set up a random number generator, and the questions will be selected randomly from the total number of questions submitted by the citizens. And there were 22 questions submitted for the mayoral candidates and 22 questions submitted for the council candidates. If a number repeats itself, because this is a small pool, I will select another random number. The questions otherwise, I will read, except we have several that are very long. So as you can see on the screen here, I will read the question part of that. The candidates have seen the entire statement, but I will only read the question part, and you can read the rest of the statement while it is posted. Let's see. Otherwise, each candidate is going to have an opportunity to respond to each question. The sequence of candidates will begin alphabetically and then sequence through so that each candidate has an equal opportunity to respond from the first position multiple times. And so I have a sequence set up, and the candidates also receive that sequence. I'll read each question, and it'll be shown on the GoToMeeting screen. So I just want to ask the candidates now, and we had talked about this before, do you have any, from the entire pool of candidates, do you have any questions now on in terms of how things will go?
No.
Nope.
No, thank you.
Okay, sounds good. And so we will begin, and we will look now at 6 p.m. for 1 hour for the mayoral candidates. Going to my list. And oh, by the way, it's alphabetical by last name, not the first name. So we'll start with Mark Bruner for the mayoral candidates. And if the council candidates desire, you can go ahead and turn your cameras off now while the mayoral candidates are on. And then we'll ask you to come back on camera when we begin working with the council candidates. I'm going to set my timer here for 1 hour. So Mark, it is your turn to begin with your opening statement, please.
Great. Thank you so much. First of all, I did want to thank Tom, you as moderator, Sylvia, and the city staff for accommodating us at Meet the Candidates. It's always a wonderful opportunity for the residents to hear from the candidates. We're in a little bit of a different situation this year because of COVID restrictions, but hopefully this will be an informative process. And I also applaud those residents that are in attendance, on this, kind of attending to their civic duty, which is important. I also just want to extend my thanks to all the candidates that are running, for both mayor, for Phil for running, for the council members that are running for the council positions, because I think it's critical, especially in a city our size, to have that level of civic engagement and involvement in the city. So I really would appreciate anybody who's willing to stand and serve in capacities both elected and volunteer for committees. Real briefly, I think a lot of folks know me from my participation both as a council member in the past. I served on council for 4 years, from 2015 to 2019. I really appreciated my time on the council. I learned quite a lot about local city government and Sunset Valley in particular. I did move to Sunset Valley with my family in 2013, 7 years ago, specifically for the reason because I thought that it was a small community that I would have a better chance of engaging with instead of the large community of Austin, which we previously resided in. I was, here with my family, my wife Zoe, who is part of the Planning Environmental Committee. She's a very active participant in her own field and her own interests. And we have 4 kids, 3 of them that we brought with us to Sunset Valley, and then one that it came to us in Sunset Valley. So we've definitely planted our roots here, and love the city, love the environment. It's hard to say what captures the essence of Sunset Valley for me, but I'll just kind of briefly share that right before the meeting, I was actually going on a walk, taking our dog, which has become a daily routine for the past 7 months, and I just was thinking about how lucky we are to live in a city with the conservation and green spaces that we have, with the commitment to stewardship, with the involvement that we have. So I think that kind of reflection, that kind of essence, I've been doing this kind of daily engagements with just our larger space around us. I want to convey that and bring that back to our city government and share those values. And I think my time is up at this point, so appreciate that, Tom, and I'll hand it off to Phil.
Thank you. And Phil, just hold on a second while I reset the timer. And for those that have joined here a little bit late, the timer will not allow me to set half minutes. So they have 2.5 minutes and 1.5. So it's actually, when it hits 30 seconds, it's time for each one to stop. So that's why that goes on. And thank you, Mark. Phil?
Thank you, Mark. Good evening. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all the residents who are joining us here tonight, and all of those residents who submitted questions. I also want to thank Tom for taking the time to moderate this event, and also thank all my fellow candidates for committing themselves to serve this great city of ours. My professional career was in the technology sector. And when I was starting out as a young CEO of a public company, it became obvious to me very, very early on that I worked for the shareholders. I made it my job to get to know them. Some were large institutions, but the majority were individuals, normal, everyday people just going about their lives. The more I got to know them, the more I learned about what was motivating them to invest in our company. They weren't looking to be overnight millionaires or buying and dumping stock on a whim. The vast majority were doing what we all try to do. They were building a nest egg for retirement, saving for their children's education, or planning for a bigger house down the road. And once I knew that, once I understood that the decisions I made day in and day out would have a direct impact on whether or not these families got their nest egg, put their kids through college, or were able to move into a bigger house, well, then I knew I had to get it right. Then I had to make the kinds of decisions that would safeguard the health of the company, because that meant I was safeguarding the health of their financial dreams and aspirations. So you may ask, what's that got to do with running for mayor? Well, as you know, the mayor is the chief executive officer of the city, and you, the residents, are its shareholders. When you bought your house in Sunset Valley or built your house, you did more than just invest your money here. You invested yourself in building a way of life for you and your family. That lifestyle is the single most important thing we need to protect. It is a lifestyle centered around having acres of natural habitat right outside our front doors, having miles of bike trails in our backyards, and living in safe, quiet neighborhoods where you can still look at the night and see more stars, or the occasional coyote walking down your driveway. If you elect me as your next mayor, I will do everything I can to protect that investment, and to see that life you built here is as prosperous, healthy, and sustainable as possible. I'm asking for your vote tonight, and in return, pledge to do my best to honor that you trust that you will invest in me. Thank you.
Thanks, Phil. Okay, we'll begin with our questions, and as you noticed, we'll have those up. You see some of those now. So our first question is for the candidates, for the mayoral candidates, is question number 14. And I will read that for both the candidates. What is your position on the sudden first-time enforcement of no political signs in the right-of-way without advance warning and discussion? And Phil, you will respond first on this. And again, just watch the timer and know that when that hits 1.5 minutes, you're done.
Thank you. Obviously, a very appropriate question with what's been going on recently. Let me say up front, I do not think for 1 minute any of this action was politically motivated or was an issue of restricting free speech. I don't think anybody in the city would ever stand for that. I think what happened was unfortunate, and lesson to be learned from this, the timing was not appropriate, and the way in which it communicated could be done in a much better manner. It could have been done with more notice. It could have been somewhat friendlier as well. We all need to take lessons from that. Having said that, we have regulations, we have a law on the books that limits signs of all types in the right of way. And I think the important thing is we enforce that consistently and equitably. We take great pride in this city. We don't want it spoiled by ugly signs. We don't want it spoiled by messy signs. We have rules in place. And if the citizens and the residents of the city decide those aren't the rules, then it should be brought up and brought before council. I support the enforcement of the signs, the ROW's issue regarding signs. It should be done equitably. It should be done consistently. And I think we need to take away from this a lesson of how to communicate with our residents in the future.
Thank you, Phil. Okay, Mark, it's your turn.
Thank you. I first of all want to applaud, I think, the message that the city administrator sent afterwards, after the feedback from the citizens, because I think that was an example of clear communication and ideally what we want to be, transparent about from the beginning. And I think that the city administrator put together a robust response, that clarified, what the code was, what the application was. I certainly agree that that the communication up front and that first element was could have been improved. What I would prefer to see in issues like this, we are a small city and we can manage this in a way that's a little bit more community leaning. And I think that it would have been appropriate to raise the concern at City Council for discussion. That would have allowed City Council to provide any feedback or guidance if there needed to be any policy or ordinance changes that might have mitigated or changed how we apply that. But I certainly don't mind, that the city administrator is enforcing code. I just think that this needs to be a discussion since we are a small city and we can accommodate those types of discussions, where it doesn't need to be a reaction. But like I said, I do applaud the following messages from the city, to clarify that. And I'm also very much in favor of that being applied uniformly and not in a specified manner.
Thank you, Mark. Our next question is question 17, and I'll read that for you. Because of the general cultural anxiety about the pandemic and civil unrest, and because of the recent Sunset Valley layoffs and cutbacks, what measures would you take to improve morale for everyone working for and volunteering with the city of Sunset Valley? And Mark, you're first on this one.
It's a good question. This is, obviously on the top of a lot of folks' minds, what are the impacts of the pandemic? And that's creating its own level of anxiety, not just for the community of Sunset Valley, but just for individual families and individuals themselves. And that's a heightened sense of anxiety that I think is, leading to a number of outlets that are non-productive or counterproductive. For our city in particular, this is a time for us to unify ourselves and come up with a response that leads forward with engagement, I think, with our community. And the way I think that we can embody that is through, one of the fears I think that I've heard recently, from people is just this general mistrust, of information and general mistrust of the administration or the council or the staff and the elected officials. And some of this is just an idea of transparency. How can we be more transparent? And I really applaud the council's recent efforts and the administration's recent efforts to make our data and our processes more transparent. And I think that's an approach that we need to continue to incrementally push forward, because that embodies trust to people when they can see the processes and understand the decisions and understand for themselves, where those processes and decisions are being made on their behalf and when they can engage with them.
Thank you, Mark. Phil, let me reset the timer here. Your turn.
Thank you. There's no doubt COVID has changed our lives in ways that many of us could never have imagined. And there's still and will be, for quite a while, a level of uncertainty that will be with us. What I think we can focus our energy is
Sorry, Phil.
continuing.
Yeah, I got it. It took me a few seconds to get the timer. Go.
That's okay. Should I continue? Is that okay?
Yes, go.
What I think we should focus our energy and must focus our energy is continuing to honor the commitments that have been established by the residents over the years. Things like being good stewards of the natural spaces around it, being wise with our spending, so that we have no city debt and no property debts, and building a safe, beautiful community to live in. Volunteers are the backbone of our city. We couldn't operate the way we do without their dedicated services. Whether it be, I had the pleasure of being at the open house and flipping burgers with the folks that made that such a successful event, to the people who serve on the various committees, providing council with guidance and advice and just words of wisdom. I was so happy to see that CED made sure that there was some funds set aside to honor those volunteers whenever we can with the COVID, restrictions around us. A simple thank you goes a long way. And I would extend that thank you. And I would say, without you folks who are the volunteers, this city would not be the city it is today.
Thank you, Phil. Our next question is question number 3. Cynthia and Matt will put the entire question up. It is very long, so I'm going to focus on the last part, actually, where it's highlighted. This is the question, and if it's okay, I may paraphrase just here for a minute. So the question is, at the bottom of this, what are your thoughts on whether input on a decision of this magnitude, and if I can just take a little bit out of the large section, this dealt with layoffs and budget cuts, should or should not be thoroughly vetted by a wider field of folks since there was time to do so. And Phil, you're first on this one.
Let me just say this, the decisions that were made on council during the beginning of the COVID crisis were not easy. They were very tough, very emotional. And I think everybody that entered into that decision process understand the seriousness of the decisions that were about to be made. I did listen to residents, continue to listen to residents. We should always do that. At the end of the day, residents have elected council members to make decisions, not just in good times, but in tough times. I think the decisions that were made were good ones. They impacted some people in an unfortunate manner, but I think overall they were the right decisions to make. And hindsight is always 20. Can you always do a better job of communicating? Absolutely you can. As you just said earlier about the issue of the ROW, science and the ROW. I think we're putting a lot of things into place with open.gov to improve that communication and transparency with our residents. I think, did we do a good job? Yes. Could we do a better job? Yes. We have to listen to our residents. We have to listen to the feedback that comes back from our various committees. But the decisions made were not made lightly. They were discussed at length. And I think every one of us understood the severity of the issues we were about and the significance of those issues and decisions we were about to make.
Okay. Thank you, Phil. Mark, your turn.
I certainly have a lot of respect for the council and for the mayor and for the city administration who've had to weather this crisis in their current roles. And that's not something that, I envy them for, and it's not a challenge that I'm, looking forward to as just my own personal preference, but it is a challenge that's in front of us. And it is one that I feel it's my duty to help and assist with. So I respect that motivation, and I respect their thoughtfulness. I do think, though, that as a city, there are some decisions that, when I'll highlight that last section, since there was time to do so, I feel that we did have additional time where we could make a decision of that without kind of the immediacy. There were other aspects that did warrant an immediate reaction, shutting down current projects and spending, those effects and those actions, I think, were appropriate and reasonable given the unknowns of the crisis at the time and the magnitude of our impact. And I think that's the action that I fully back and applaud, the City Council for taking. The other actions, as far as staff layoffs, that's a decision that I think that given our relative security, our relative, reserves and funding that we have, and our involvement of our committees and the importance of those committees, that I wish we had taken more time with. I think certainly as a member of Budget and Finance, that's part of what we expected. But I fully do respect the council and the mayors for the crisis management they had to go through. I just think that, at this point, I would have disagreed with that decision and given us more time.
Okay. Thank you, Mark. Okay, our next question is question number 5. Again, it is a longer one, so I'll focus on the actual question. And I quote, "This is a 2-part question. First, if elected in the future, would you be willing to commit to a fully visible form of Meet the Candidates with live virtual questions should the situation necessitate? Second, and more importantly, on an ongoing basis, if elected, would you commit to all council meetings being fully visible?" Mark, you're first.
Sure, I'll address the first part of the question because I also believe that this is part of the transparency. The Meet the Candidates has always been somewhat of an informal, event that's benefit from the virtue of having an engaged citizenry that can meet at City Hall, and we can, get it facilitated by a moderator, and that I think that's always been sort of the forum and the opportunity for us. This year, the candidates met and decided to move forward with a virtual format that, as you see now, and it was agreed to by all the candidates in discussions with the moderator and the city administration. And so I think that's important to note for the residents that might feel like, this is an abbreviated process or a questionable process. So from my perspective, I think it's being handled and managed as long as the candidates are meeting and discussing that. The second part of the question, and whether I'd commit to it, I would love the opportunity to speak in front of people again, and I did advocate for hosting live questions, but I also realize the accommodations and restrictions and the burden that puts on our administrators and our moderator. The second part of the question, this is a tough one. I mean, I see other city councils operating with visible, environments. So I don't think that, from my perspective, I would like to run city councils that way. I also recognize that individuals may have preferences for not, having their cameras on because of specific environmental conditions that they need to meet because they're working from home. I'm going to be visible if we host city councils virtually and I'm elected mayor.
Thank you. Phil.
Yeah, thank you. Let me echo portions of that. Let me state, the format for tonight's Meet the Candidates was agreed upon by all of the candidates, and I support that. My first Meet the Candidates, which was 2 years ago, I don't think, and I try to remember, I don't think we had the questions beforehand, and that's fine as well. So I'm open to whatever approach the group of candidates want, and support that. And finally, yes, I do support fully visible council meetings. I'm tonight using one of the city's facilities and socially distancing, and it overcomes some of the difficulties some of us may face, barking dogs, and actually pretty lousy bandwidth on parts of Oakdale. So yes, and the short answer is I do support fully visible council meetings.
Okay, thank you, Phil. Let me set the timer. Our next question is question number 4. Given the highly overstated and inaccurate projections of lost sales tax revenue made by the city administration at the beginning of the COVID-19 crisis, and the panicky and counterproductive decisions made on the basis of those projections, what would you do differently?
Thank you. Well, let me say up front, is it, I think it's me?
Hold on just a minute. Let me get the timer started, Phil. You're next, but I got to get the timer started. There you go.
Okay, thank you. Let me just say up front, in total disclosure, I wasn't privy to any panicky decision making. The decisions and discussions I was involved in, which involved another council member and city staff, city administrator, were very serious, very deliberate. and took into account all of the information we had at that particular time. Let's be honest, COVID-19 is nothing like any of us have seen before, or the world has seen before. We approached that decision making with all of those concerns behind us and based it on the best data we had at that time. We made some tough decisions on those. And what guided us was, we want to continue to provide the services that our residents deserve and expect, and do it in the best possible manner, despite this terrible pandemic that we were facing. I think we achieved that. And that night, when the council unanimously voted to cut personnel expenses by 25%, we all knew the impact that could have on people. And we all knew the deliberation that had gone into that. It's a tough decision. It's a heart-wrenching decision. And it never gets better whenever those type of decisions come up. I stand by the decisions, and I stand by my fellow council members and city administrator and the mayor for making those very, very tough decisions that night.
Okay, Mark, your turn.
Certainly at the beginning of COVID-19, there was a lot of uncertainty about, the messaging that we were getting from various organizations about the expected duration and about the impact, to it have both regionally and to our local city. And I think all of us have, a measure of experience now and wisdom, that we can reflect on. So this is really, it's a tough question because, you put yourself in the moment. And, what would you do? It's really hard to reflect back on that. I can only speak to my experience as a member of Budget and Finance at the time. And I alluded to this a little bit earlier in that, as you're going through the process of asking questions from staff and asking questions about, potential revenue projections and what, stores were closing for how long, there was still, I think, from my perspective, and I think this is shared by some other members of the Budget and Finance Committee, kind of a lack of data to really make a clear analysis. And what we wanted was some time to make that analysis and take reasonable measures, closing down spending and shutting down new projects and limiting to critical services those needs that we have. But I really would have liked us to have some additional time to collect information, since we have the reserve to do so, and we can make those decisions, more effectively and more community oriented.
Okay. Thank you, Mark. Our next question is question number 7. And it states, should Public Works be restructured? And if yes, how? And Mark, you lead off on this one.
This is an interesting question because I think, today we are actually going through a restructure of Public Works in various forms. We've done, staff layoffs, we've done, non-hires for positions that were open, we've translated services that were previously in-house to service-based, with the TexasCape contracts. And so some of this is ongoing, and it's a natural sort of reaction to the current needs and environment of the city. I think to a large degree, this question should be answered by the new Public Works Director when they are brought on board. So we are currently looking for a new Public Works Director we're hoping to bring on that leads with experience and knowledge that can make a recommendation to council. I think that this is an important aspect of that role is to providing that experience and expertise to provide recommendations to council so that they can enact any changes that would be necessary. I think there are areas where it makes sense, where there are cost benefits or there are, potentially benefits to the residents where, if we need to, contract out our landscaping, for example, is that a benefit? Well, I guess we'll see. We're undergoing an experiment now, but I think that's one of those steps that it's interesting to evaluate, and I'm glad the council is looking at cost saving measures. But this is really a role I think the Public Works Director, when they are brought on, should advise and provide guidance for directly.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Phil?
Yes, we are in the process of recruiting a new Public Works Director, and I was so glad to see that in the budget, not only did we allocate those funds for that, but we also at the same time stressed the importance of bringing that person on as quickly as possible. I think, when that person comes on board, he or she will be quickly tasked with taking stock of what we're doing right, what we're doing wrong, what we could do better, what we could do less of, what we could do more of. And I think if the Public Works Director feels there's a need to restructure, I think he or she should be given the time to put that plan together. It should be circulated for all of us to have comments on. Should be, detailed and presented to the residents. But I tend to say, if we're going to go to the effort, which we should, of hiring a very competent Public Works Director, that person should make this decision.
Okay, thank you, Phil. Our next question is question number 2. And again, it is a long question. So I am going to just read the last part where the question is formally listed, and you can see it on your screen. The question is, what would you do as mayor to ensure that our water utility is safely, legally, and properly operated? And Phil, you go first on this one.
Well, I think we just discussed one of the most significant measures we're taking here to ensure the safety of our water supply is we're hiring a Public Works Director. And I think any Public Works Director that comes on board should have the experience that we need in maintaining the safety and viability of the water we supply to our residents. I think also we have started, I think one of the things that's very important is education, continuing educations for our employees, for our technicians. I'm a big fan of that. We did put aside additional money to fund additional training for those folks and cross-training so that people have a broader expertise. I think we can put on that. We also have to do a very detailed look of how we spend money. It's interesting, over the last 10 years, we've dedicated over $1.5 million from our utility subsidy to the water and wastewater infrastructure. And yet, by many estimates, we're losing over 1 million gallons of water from our system every year. That is in a city where we take great pride in our environmental stewardship. So we have to start looking inwardly and say, what can we do better? And I'm looking forward to working, if elected, with that new Public Works Director to take these issues and run with them and see what we can do to make sure our stewardship of our very basic services to our residents is of the nature that we all feel very confident in.
Okay. Mark, your turn.
I don't know the specifics of this particular example that's being brought up in the question, other than as an external participant in the community. And, it does raise a concern that, we are leveraging resources that are limited, and we don't have a backup plan in case those resources become unavailable. As a city, we've decided that Public Works is a priority for us to have in-house management of certain, parts of our infrastructure. And that, we kind of grew that way as a city because that's, we maintain our own streets. We have this kind of immediate access to staff and resources for, basic services like brush chipping and for water delivery and for, the services that we take for granted. However, we can't be negligent. We have requirements that, for regulatory requirements for the TCEQ for water quality. We have to meet those requirements. If we are taking on the burden of having, that in-house expertise to provide, the requirement, fulfilling those requirements, then we also need to have the ability to service that, in the case of emergencies. This is an area where, if we don't want to bring on additional staff, there might be an opportunity for us to have a service contract, or an engineering contract or an interlocal agreement where we can rely on, in times where we don't have our operator or operators. Ideally we're hiring multiple operators, or the Public Works Director will have that capacity. But this is an area I think where we can look at, we need to examine ourselves and the services we want to provide as a city, and that we need to have contingency planning for.
Thank you, Mark. Our next question is question 18. Let that be put up and I'll read it. What position do the candidates have on medical marijuana, recreational marijuana, and decriminalization? And Mark, you get to go first on this one.
I'll let Phil answer this one first.
Well, we gotta go in order, Mark.
It's a great question, by the way.
Yeah, it's a great question, but it's also the first time I think I've heard this being a topic at our local level. And it's not that it's, that's a unique thing, because in the previous Meet the Candidates, this hasn't been something that I've seen the community raise. It certainly hasn't come up in council or policy discussions, but it is a growing and active, area of, state law, especially across, the nation, where states are taking a much more lenient or less restrictive use of marijuana, both for medicinal purposes as well as recreational purposes. For Sunset Valley, since this hasn't been a kind of a key issue that's that's driving a lot of our policy and decisions, I don't think that there's not a particular council action that's going to work towards identifying us as a particular stance on a legalization of marijuana. I think largely we will be following regional, state, local, what Austin does. We'll largely be following along the lines of. I know Austin has also taken a less aggressive approach to, to arrest with regards to marijuana, and that may be something that we want to consider as a city, because it's particularly a regional issue. But this is, Texas doesn't have any laws right now as far as, legal marijuana use. And, this is an area that's the state is going to be largely where that's decided and where it's applied. So, but I do support, the decriminalization and the aspect of what Austin's done. And I think that's an important aspect that we can potentially carry forward.
Okay. Thank you, Mark. Phil, yours.
Yeah, thank you. It seems on a regular basis now we're hearing of more and more states legalizing the use of cannabis, and just recently, I think it was last week, I read that Maine is legalized the use of cannabis products. It's not one we face right now, because we obviously the state is not taking this up at this particular time. My simple answer is I support the decriminalization of cannabis products, but with conditions. And there's two conditions I think that come to mind very, very much at the forefront of any decision. One is we have to have, if we choose, and if at the right time and Texas decides to go this way, we have to have rules, regulations in place to protect minors, just like we do today with alcohol and tobacco and products of that nature. The second thing is a bigger picture here. Our food supply is protected by very, very strict, guidelines on the quality of food. And, the one thing we don't want is a whole bunch of, product coming online that people don't understand the integrity or don't trust the integrity of it. And I think that's a key in any push to legalize the use of cannabis products. If done right, you can see the benefits that it brought to the state of Colorado. Over $1 billion in revenue every year that's going to continuation education programs and being put to good use. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next question is question number 10. Do you agree with the recent decision to limit access to the city attorney to only the mayor and city administrator and not council members? And why? And Phil, you get to go first on this, and be a little careful at the end, Phil. You've run over a couple times.
Thank you. I appreciate the warning.
It's a yellow card.
It's a yellow card.
Right. I don't know.
I was never a soccer player. I was a rugby player. Okay. So I'm not aware of any restrictions. I don't feel I'm restricted at all in my ability to call and converse with our legal counsel. There were restrictions, there were gatekeeping items put in place where if you wanted to call or talk with our legal counsel, it had to go through Sylvia, our city administrator, or the mayor. That was put in for two reasons. One is really based on transparency. If one council member was talking to the attorney, I think all council members and the residents have to have access to that information. I think it's very important when we talk about transparency to be able to do that. And the second thing was to manage our costs, to see where the money was being spent. Even this year during the budget process, the issue came up of how much are we spending on legal fees, and it's a lot. And I think people want accountability in that respect of how we are spending our money with it. So that's my answer to that. I don't feel there's any restrictions. There was gatekeeping and transparency issues put in place.
Okay, thank you. Mark, your turn, please.
I'll echo a little bit of what Phil said because I'm not aware of a specific policy. However, I know that there is a financial impact for access to the legal services that we have as a city. And being on budget and finance, being on council, you see those reports and the bills on a monthly basis, and we want to make sure that we're using our time and our resources wisely. That being said, I think that council members should have access to our legal advice when they are putting an agenda item together or preparing for a council session. I think that during council meetings, if there are questions directed to our legal counsel, they should be, unrestricted in that. And I think that there should be follow-up, if there are, items that, that they're asked during a council meeting. And that goes to that transparency too, because I think that if it's in the context of preparing for an agenda or if it's in the context of a council meeting, then, that's very visible, right? That's visible that you have, you've used those services in the fashion that's towards the public service. But the financial impact and just the limits of that and the gatekeeping. One of the things I think we always talked about also on council was you don't want duplicate issues getting sent by multiple council members. So there makes some sense to advise on, from a city administration standpoint, if this is an effective question and use of resources. But I don't think that there should be, hard restrictions on councils, especially when they're preparing agenda items, which is critical to moving policy debate forward.
Okay. Thank you, Mark. Our next question is question 16. Again, it is a slightly longer question, so I will just read the last sentence, which is the core, and you can read the rest up on the screen. What will you do to address the rancor that permeates the council meetings, mitigate the animosity that seems to underscore discussions, and bring the residents together with a shared vision of Sunset Valley future? And Mark, you get to go first on this one.
Yeah, this question stood out because of the use of the word rancor, and that's a very strong word, but I think people feel very strongly about this particular sense, and it's in a lot of the discussion we've had tonight, regarding anxiety, about transparency, about being able to trust the information and being able to access the information kind of feeds this, right? So where there's a vacuum, there's speculation, and where that can lead down the routes of misunderstanding other people's points of view. I can speak to my time on council, where I think what I attempted to do was try to facilitate dialogues that were productive and led towards, decision process, that ultimately had to come to a vote, and there may be disagreements about those votes. But, I think that I'm very much in favor of that facilitation and progressive dialogue, where we can agree to disagree at the end, but we should be fully understanding of each other's positions. And, that comes through, understanding what are the drivers, what are the motivations, and what is the data that's feeding some of that, so that can be accurately reflected on and perhaps, debated, right? I think that's another point of, discussion that we've had recently in a lot of these meetings. So I would leverage my time experience on council, where that was what I attempted to do, and I believe that that's a successful model to carry forward in the city.
Okay. Thank you, Mark. Phil, let me reset the timer. Your response, please.
Thank you, Tom, and I'll respond because in the respect of the time allocated to me, and I promise not to go over on this one, two simple things I would do. The first thing is right now council meets for a planning session only once a year. I would extend that to 4 times a year as a minimum, where we can meet as a team, we can meet and reflect on the goals, objectives, the issues that the residents face and want us to work on. I think once a year is too infrequent. That's one step I would take. The second step I would take is to restructure the council meetings. Maybe every other council meeting should not have a decision-making element to it. Maybe that should be a session where we work together. We work on the issues being raised by our residents. We talk about them. We let the residents voice those opinions, and we take them into a situation where we put our best effort together to work together on those issues. Maybe taking away that decision-making once every other council meeting will alleviate some of that tension and have us working, essentially all pulling on the same end of the rope, which I think is essential.
Okay, thank you. Our next question is question number 22. What is your vision, if any, for the homestead property? And Phil, you get to go first on this one.
Thank you. As you may be aware, at the last council meeting, Councilmember Reitz and myself sponsored the use of funds that have been set aside to do the initial study of what can be done with the homestead, and in particular, first step being the environmental considerations on that. I think we can enhance the property and turn it into a place that attracts visitors without altering its intended use as a natural green space. That's critical that we don't do that. It can be a destination for our residents, a meeting point. It can be a place where people want to gather, maybe listen to some music, walk a nature trail. And at the same time, it can also be an attraction for people to come to the city. We are working very, very hard. Will work very hard with the newly selected marketing company to build a brand. And what better thing to center a brand around other than this wonderful place that we have, centrally located in our commercial district, that can be available to our residents and be an attraction for people to come and shop and, dine in the city of ours.
Okay, thank you, Phil. Mark, your turn.
Sure, and I'll respond first to the question by, I know this property has different names, based on, what is being referred to, but essentially this is the boundary of Ernest Robles and the shopping center where Docks is, and that property right now is used for wastewater treatment and recovery, and it kind of used as a part of a restricted area. This is something that I think was really brought up maybe about a year ago when I was still on council. I think Mayor Cardona actually proposed, bringing this to the forefront as a potential development site. This needs to be looked at. What are the environmental impacts? What are the changes that would need to be made to the restricted or the deeds or the any kind of restricted covenants on the property? So I think that's the first analysis, and that's what the city's doing right now, which is appropriate. When I walk by that space, I do see a lot of opportunity, though. When we go to, the playground or Docks, or when we used to go to the playground now, it's been several months now, but, we're walking by the water recovery pond. It's a wetland now, which is amazing. You see birds migrating and staying over there at various points of the year. And it's one of these things that I wish we had an opportunity to invite ourselves into that natural space in a way that was, reflected our stewardship. I think it would be amazing if we could do something there, because I think that there is a potential there that could, inject some vitalism into that area, not just the Homestead Shopping Center, but the other shopping centers as well. And it could become a place that, if it's, inviting us into that experience, that natural space, could be a welcome addition to our city.
Thank you, Mark. Our next question is question 20. Mark, you get to go first. That question is, what will you do to enhance and protect city-owned properties?
This is interesting because we have so much property that is set aside for specific conservation reasons, and those are areas that we've dedicated and we've protected in some fashion from development or from impact, or and they want in their limited access, from several points of view. And that's been a discussion point at recent council meetings, especially for what that means, in terms of access and accessibility. But in the large part, what we need to do is continue to protect those areas and be stewards, because I think it's larger than just our enjoyment of those areas. It also has an impact to our region and our space over the Edgeworths Aquifer. I would say that this is a question that is a little bit more complex, because city-owned property, the city has, has in the past purchased property in order to do conservation, but they've also purchased property in order to do watershed protection or easements, or, potentially to, do part of that, but also release some of it back to the public. And so, I think that's also always has to be on the kind of consideration of, when we say city-owned property, it can be a complex, myriad of reasons why the city owns that. But the majority of those reasons are green spaces, and the reasons that they're there are for, allowing us to interact with nature, but also preserve that natural experience and environment for not only ourselves, but our future generations.
Thank you, Mark. Phil.
This is a great question. It really is. And I think it's at the heart of what we as a city can do to bring our financial and environmental goals together in one cohesive strategy. We have some wonderful open spaces. And that is what we all want as a lifestyle. That's what we've invested in. So I think we can do a series of things. One is we can make sure the protection of those spaces are adequately funded. Number one. Number two, we can do we can embark on an education process. People respect the environment more once they understand the environment, once they understand the fragility of certain parts of it. So we can do that. I have visions that we could have a docent program. We have a tremendous amount of expertise on wildlife and fauna of this area right here amongst our citizens. I would encourage the development of a docent program with these folks, not only educating us as residents, but also visitors to the city. And we can enshrine this idea of the protection of the environment and the beauty of our spaces in any marketing strategy that we put out there, working with our new marketing company. It is a critical element. We have to have a cohesive strategy, and we can do both. We can protect what we have and enhance what we have, and at the same time still have, financial stewardship that all of our residents want to see.
Okay, thank you. Our next question is question 15. What is your position on direct subsidy of private businesses in Sunset Valley using our precious city funds? Given all the uncertainty and disruption we've had, how do you plan on strengthening our financial position to prevent annexation by the city of Austin? And Phil, you go first on this one.
Well, I think it says it there, the best defense against annexation is a strong, vibrant city. And so how do we go about it? We have that today. We have a strong city. We're blessed with significant reserves. We're not in crisis mode, but we are in a mode where we have to plan for the future. So I think it's a series of things. We've taken a big step forward here in the implementation of open.gov. We are now allowing citizens to see the budget in a much simpler process than they have ever been able to do before. And hopefully that will provide us the feedback that we as council members or the mayor need in making decisions going forward. So I think that's step number one. Step number two, we have to face facts. We are dependent to the very, very, very large extent on one revenue source, and that's called sales tax. And sales tax is generated by our retail partners that operate in our commercial centers. We have to listen to them so that we can attract new businesses to this area. That was a point brought up by the CED committee earlier this year, and at the same time also retain the ones that we have. We have to listen, we have to work with them. And we can do that. We can do that. But those businesses we bring in have to work and be copacetic with the values that we share as a city.
Okay, thank you, Phil. I suspect we'll get 2 more questions before your closing statements. We'll either 2 or 3, depending on how the timing goes. Our next question is question 11.
I don't know if I got a chance to answer this question.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh my gosh, I'm off one. Way to go. I'm sorry. I scratched that. Yep. Reset.
You can slide and just go on. But this is an important question.
Tom, that's a yellow card for you.
No, Phil. That's a yellow card for me. Yes, a yellow card for me. I got it. Thanks, Mark. Go.
Yeah, this is the core of where we're at in this crisis, is that we derive the majority of our revenue from sales tax, and it's vital that we have a strong business partnership to continue the lifestyle that we enjoy. I think this question is speaking to when a large measure is a highly unlikely scenario, because annexation, by the recent Texas legislature, I think that they passed last year, is much harder, and Austin cannot unilaterally annex cities like Sunset Valley, you'd have to, I believe, de-incorporate in order to be annexed. But it does speak to the fear of what happens if we lose all that sales tax revenue. Well, then effectively, it's hard for us to exist as a city and provide the services that we have without some other form of revenue. And that kind of brings up the the dreaded specter of of having our own tax-based property tax and things like that. So it's vital. We have to have a strong, vibrant economy. I think one idea that I would like to see us explore is, we rely so much on our staff expertise. We're council, we enact policy. We're mayor, we lead the council. But having the staff resources and having an economic development resource on staff, I think we go a long ways towards helping us with our long-range financial planning and development of these, our revitalization of our businesses. So that's where I land. The subsidy to private businesses, we are experimenting with that with the farmers market, and I'd like to see, what some of the results of that are in the future.
Okay, thank you, Mark. And Mark, you get to go first on the last question. So. Okay, and the last question is number 11. What do you want to do to improve city planning?
So we've spoken about transparency. We've spoken about, the need for community involvement. We have a really engaged community. I've experienced it on committee levels. I've experienced it on council. I love the fact that we can, as a city, bring ourselves together and discuss hard issues of policy and planning. I think where we fail are some of those issues around transparency and understanding what the process is, or understanding, what the direction from the current leadership and elected officials are. The idea that we get together and plan out our policies and our goals for the year, that's great, but it means little if it's not, brought back to the public and, used as a way to engage with them to say, these are the priorities that, we've set for ourselves. What else, how can we affect those? How can we take these back to the committees and drive towards this common goal? But it also, how do you feed into that process and bring those to the elected officials so that they become, part of a cohesive group of planning? We struggled with the city's planning. Since I've been in the city, we've been talking about the uplands. Since I've been on the city, we've been talking about city facilities, and it takes a long time for the city to make, these decisions. And I think where we can improve is, having a kind of a strong, a position from a council that, that the city citizens are invited to react to and bring forward their ideas and participate in.
Thank you, Mark. And Phil.
Thank you. I think I touched on some portion of this earlier in my answer when I said, if you want to do improve city planning, you have to have more planning sessions. And I outlined the fact I think we should take it from once a year to at least quarterly. And also, the very restructuring the council meeting. So every other meeting is a planning session in effect. I think we also have to set ourselves clear and concise goals and objectives every year. And do the same with our committees, our various committees. I remember very early on at my first meeting, one of my first council meetings once I was elected as a council member, it was a joint meeting of the council and the Budget and Finance Committee. And I asked the Budget and Finance Committee chairman there a very simple question: what do you need from council? And his answer was very profound. We need clear, concise goals and objectives. That's how you go about planning. That's how you go about both short-term and long-term planning. We hit the three elements of more planning time, clear, concise goals and objectives, and the embodiment of transparency. That's the three things I think will make a difference.
Thank you. Okay, we'll now have the closing statements from each candidate. We've done this for an hour. And Phil, you go first. And again, so the countdown timer now will be, you'll be done when it hits 30 seconds.
Okay.
So Phil, you get to go first.
Thank you. Again, thank you to everyone who participated in tonight's forum. It's evident that many residents, from the questions we received, feel as I do that we have something very unique and very much worth preserving here in Sunset Valley. And it's interesting, despite all of the discussion of rancor, I think we as a group of residents agree on a lot more than we disagree on. And I think that is important. So we were faced this year with a tremendous, issue. The COVID-19, no one could have predicted this. No one had a textbook on how to respond to this. Things are changing daily. We see that shopping patterns for residents are changing. We see that businesses are trying to work on trying to guess what those patterns will be in the future. Do I think we're in a financial crisis? No, I don't. But I do think we face significant challenges ahead, and we will have to embrace change in order to continue to preserve the lifestyle that we all want. I think the decisions that we make the next 2 years are vitally important to preserving this lifestyle. Here's some of the strategies I think I'd like to outline. I touched on these a little bit earlier in various answers. We can partner with our property owners, and together we can find ways to retain and attract strong new businesses to our city. We can find ways to be more cost effective with our city operations without in any way diminishing the level of service we provide to our residents. We can highlight the city's great green spaces by doing simple things with the areas that shoppers would find very enticing. We can build shade structures. We can build small meeting areas. Those are small things, but they add up. And finally, we can be more strategic with our planning so that we don't have expenditures for unexpected expenditure for $80,000 for a lift station or $100,000+ for a backhoe. Those are the things I think we can focus on. And I think we can continue to preserve, despite the tough times that are going to be ahead, times that are going to be changed, uncharted. If we focus on those things, we have a great way to navigate through that. And actually the city can be even better than what the great city is today, is my belief.
Thank you, Phil. Mark, I'll reset the timer here. Your turn, please.
First of all, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you tonight. I think it's been informative to hear your questions, as they've been given to us by Tom. And I know there's a number of that we didn't touch on, especially, regarding, how can we improve that collaborative kind of committee involvement, and how can we bring back, some of that collaborative engagement. I think that, that's my reason for running, is that I see as an opportunity for us to bring a consensus-based government, into the next years, and stabilize where we're at with regards to both our finances and our stewardship. I think it's important, from my perspective, because I live here, my family lives here, we intend to live here, while we're raising our kids and beyond. And this is the community that we have chosen and that we want them to inherit. And where we can get there with more collaborative dialogue and discussions with all members of our community. And that's not just residents, that's the partners that we have in the business areas, that's the school, that's the farmers market. These are places and opportunities for us to listen and work together to make our city what we want it to be, and to bring our finances back to a stable point in response to some of the challenges that we face. And that's a primary goal that I have going into this as mayor, and that's where my background and interest is coming from, the Budget and Finance Committee and on. But that's because it's so important for the longevity of our city and our what we like, our quality of life, and the quality of the environment around us. I think that stewardship I spoke to at the beginning, kind of walking through and experiencing the green spaces, all of us have probably had an opportunity, I hope, to share those spaces much more. And that's been one of the benefits, as a result of our restrictions due to COVID. But it's just amazing to be able to do that on a daily basis and to greet other members of the community in that environment when we've been so restricted on our ability to do so in other avenues. And so that's only reinforced, my intention and focus on that as a primary concern and a primary goal for our city government going forward, is that preservation.
Thank you, Mark. So thank you, Phil. Thank you, Mark, for timing. Mark, thank you for calling me on, making sure I was going in sequence correctly. I had gotten a step or two ahead of myself there. So I'll ask the mayoral candidates, if you want to stay, please, that's great, but to turn your cameras off. And I would ask the city council candidates to please turn their cameras on. Great. Let's see, Alfonso, I'm going to do just a sound check here real quick. Candidates, if you can hear me, give me a thumbs up. Alfonso, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay,
Yep.
and Alfonso, I've got you. Rose, could you give me a sound check?
Hello? Hello?
We got you, Alfonso. You're good. Rose? Nope. Rob, are you good?
Now I'm unmuted.
Yeah, now you're good. Rob, are you good?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you very much. Candidates, as you saw, the format will be the same. We'll give you 2.5 minutes for your introductory and concluding remarks and 1.5 minutes response for each question. You notice Mark kept track of me here, so each of you has the flow for the questions, and I'll just, as long as I don't get too far ahead of myself, I think we'll be in good shape. So we'll begin, and the timer, as you remember, for the introductory comments, when it hits 30 seconds, you're done. I'll do my little hyper-technical analog way of letting you know you're at 30 seconds. And then for the responses to the particular questions, you'll stop at 1.5 minutes. So Rose, you are the first for the City Council statements. If you would care to begin, then I will start the timer.
Do we
Rose,
see?
are you ready to go?
I'm ready.
Good.
Okay, great. Hi, everybody. Thank you. And I am excited to be here this evening. Thank you for all the volunteers that put it together. It's never easy. And Tom, you did a good job of letting us all have input. I cannot wait for us to be back in City Hall. Tonight's the first time I've been in City Hall since pre-COVID, even though I'm here alone. It is past time for the public process to come back into City Hall so that it's easier and we can all come in person and come to the podium and speak to council and mayor and staff and all be in the same room. I am running for council to in part give residents an option. Ideally, I would love it if we had 4 candidates running for the 2 positions so that we would have two options for the 2 seats. So part of why I'm running is to make sure that our residents have that choice. And also because I think the balance and the transition on council would benefit from having the expertise, since we know for certain we will be transitioning mayors in just a few weeks. I do have a website that just went up today, rosecardona.com. So that I don't waste too much time here, you can go there. I'll post tonight's event there also. And any written questions that I get subsequent to tonight, I'll make sure to post there so that everybody can see and get the benefit of any questions and answers that I produce over the next few weeks. And with that, good luck to everybody, and I can't wait to move forward.
Okay, thank you, Rose. Alfonso, you're next, please.
Okay. Thank you, everybody attending this meeting. Thank you, Tom, citizens and candidates. For almost 38 years, my family and I have been living in Central Texas. When my wife took us to see Sunset Valley, for me and my dogs, it was a dream. A lot of trees, green spaces, animals, peaceful and low density of people. In 2007, we were able to purchase a house in the Villas, where I enjoyed the quality of life that the city offers to all of us. I have always cared deeply about the environment, and in Sunset Valley, I found a community that does too. Now, I am a retired engineer with over 30 years of experience in working for Central Texas city governments. I know how to work with budgets, planning, and public service. Since 2016, I participate in public works and finance committees. I follow almost all city council meetings. This year, due to pandemic effects, we reduced significant community programs, improvement projects, and lost retail business revenues. In order to get through this time, the use of our economic resources needs to be well planned so we can bring back this service and do better in the future. I have the experience and the dedication to protect our environment and our economic resources. I can help plan our projects and support our community business. The residents should be the city guiding force, and I listen to residents because we need to build community consensus and open communication. If you vote for me, I will protect our quality of life, maintain our commitment to the environment, and build a strong fiscal future for our community. I have a little 24 seconds, Tom.
Yes, 24. That was 30 seconds. You're
Thank
good.
you.
Yes.
So after I hear the candidates for a mayor, I feel more happy because I think that this is a nice opportunity. We have 48 people that they attend this tonight. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Alfonso. Rob, you're up.
Hi, thank you, Tom and Sylvia and city staff. I'm Rob Johnson. I live in Old Town with my wife, Catherine. We have 3 children, Pearl, Grace, and Edie. We had a friend who lived in Sunset Valley many years ago, and we visited them soon after we moved to Central Texas. We fell in love with it. Small town, dark sky, big yards, close proximity to Austin. We bought One Reese Drive from Molly Bunner, who, along with Brett Bunner, became our neighbors and friends. These friends have all since moved, but many new friends have been made from neighbors. We've now been here for 10 years. Back then, I would sparsely attend city council meetings for the novelty of small city governance. And a spread from Doc's backyard would always help out. Most of that time passed with a pleasantly boring city government. I started noticing a change a few years ago. Things started to become a little more contentious. The council seemed to care less about consensus and more about power and unilateral actions. And I felt the character of Sunset Valley was changing. I mostly go along to get along. I struggle to understand the motive of moving to a great community and then set about changing it. And so, you know, something that went through my head, which has gone through a lot of people's minds recently, is be the change you seek. I decided to help steward the city that had been so welcoming to us all those years ago. I joined a committee. My attendance at city council meeting became more regular. I kept an eye on candidates for this year and tried to persuade past city council members to come back out. Towards the filing deadline, it looked like we were set just to shuffle the chairs a bit, and I decided I needed to run. After many times talking me out of running, Catherine ended up saying that she was happy I made my decision. I have less experience, but honestly, I feel like this year that's a positive. I stand up for other people, and I'm not afraid to ask questions. I feel like I could be a city council member that Sunset Valley deserves, and I'm asking for your vote.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. And you all can tell that's the 30-second timer, right? That's hard to read. Okay, I will only put up time from now on.
No, when I see it, I just know that it's the 30-second one. So
Okay, good.
we're good.
Good, thank you. Okay, we'll now begin with the questions. Our first question is question number 15. And it states, have you spoken to any real estate brokers, agents, or developers about the uplands? If so, what exactly did you discuss? Alfonso, you will be the first on this one. And you have a
Okay.
minute and 30 seconds.
Well, I never discussed nothing with anybody about our real estate, so that kind of people. But the uplands, in my opinion, then is still in decision of the citizens. And if we try to do something with the uplands, then I am very positive. I think that we are so lucky that we have all of that land, and will be the decision of the citizens. It's also well located that south of Austin, and I think that we have almost 9 acres with a lot of 18% impervious cover. So it has a lot of value. I think that now the companies, that they try to study what will be much better if They will use also Homestead and other different places. That will help us a lot because in reality, at this moment, we can evaluate all of that lands that they are open. And with all the citizens, I think that we have more feedback from the citizens. So I believe that this company that is doing the job for marketing, they will give it to us something that will be good for everybody. But it's a multi-use place. It's important. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Rob, you're next for the answer to this question.
Sure. I have not spoken to any brokers or agents or developers. I kind of feel like feels kind of unethical if I did kind of like reach out without bringing the city council into it. I also feel like we're quite far from reaching a community consensus about what to do with that property. You're going to see a common theme with some of these questions where, you know, I see value in untouched natural land. That's my personal preference. I'm certainly open to strong arguments for development. I think, you know, on a step-by-step basis, it's like leave it be, or if we need to do something, then it makes a good home for a farmer's market to be there that keeps a lot of the natural beauty in place, and it could be like a mixed-use area. But you know, we're also, you know, reaching out to the marketing company, Ampersand, and they're going to hopefully put together a view for a larger picture for the city where that could be used. And that's my answer.
Okay, thank you, Rob. Rose, you're next.
So I would disagree strongly with Mr. Johnson's response. This property was very clearly purchased by the community to be developed for a community use. I would agree that there is no consensus within the community, but to say that we're far off, man, that's got to make a lot of our residents give pause, because we have spent money, resources, committee effort, and there has been a pretty clear consensus that we do want to develop it in a way that benefits and also creates a highest and best use for that property. The only person that I have spoken to outside of city council meetings would be the owner of 4715. That's the adjacent property that is where Cane Rosso and Stout House are. And the conversations that I've had with the primary owner of that property, his name is Daryl Kunick, and he is a prominent local developer in Austin. And what I have asked him to do is that if he would be inclined, without the property being for sale, is to come and present a concept to city council without us having to pay for third-party consulting, and to incorporate the ideas of council, the P&E committee, and the third-party review that we did a few years back. So it would be for commercial, permanent, farmers market pavilion, something potentially a farm to market restaurant concept. But again, council would have to listen to it and vote, and then we have to decide how to pay for it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Our next question is question 18. What position do the candidates have on medical marijuana, recreational marijuana, and decriminalization? And Rob, you get to go first on that one.
Sure. I had the awkward situation of emailing Chief of Police Len Carter about the current state of legality in Sunset Valley. Mostly it was a question about whether Sunset Valley had followed Austin in decriminalizing marijuana possession. And he confirmed that that was the case. It just became kind of easier at that point to follow what Austin's been doing. I feel like it's a little outside the scope of Sunset Valley governance until Texas legalizes it, if and when that happens. At that point, then the benefit can be, you know, sales tax revenue from the sale. I personally am in favor of liberalizing marijuana laws and generally take a libertarian view on people's personal choices like that. That's it.
Okay. Thank you. Let me just check here. Rose, I think you're next. Are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready. So local government doesn't determine state law, so I can't ever see a time where anybody at the state legislature would give a even ounce of care what the Sunset Valley City Council cares about this. So I don't foresee it now or in the future being an issue that council would weigh in on. But in the event that it was legalized, I would hope that our city would be thinking in advance and figure out a way to maximize the opportunity for sales tax to be recouped, even if it was to put into infrastructure or cleaning up of areas around Sunset Valley. The first that comes to mind would be the homeless camps outside of the city. So I sure would hope that if Texas did legalize marijuana, that we would find a way to use the sales tax to clean up Travis County and increase public safety. So the trade-off being education, public safety, and cleaner Travis County. But that may be a high hope. I don't foresee that happening in the next 2 years. Thank you. I yield the floor.
Okay, thank you. Alfonso, your turn, please.
Well, I believe that the use of the marijuana for medical purpose, I agree with that. I have friends that they suffer a lot of pain, mainly young, mid-age, and olders. So I support that. Some of them, I can see the pain that they have, and some of them, they are using that marijuana and was helping them. Then I can see that every year, more and more states, they legalize that marijuana. So if they are doing that, that doesn't mean that we need to do that, but we need to continue with that studies. We need to educate the people, and in that case, some of the people that they go to the jail because they find that marijuana, not necessarily we need to criminalize that people. We need to decriminalize that people because in some places they are using and in other places they are not using. At this moment, the city of Austin, they have new policies. Then perhaps we can copy some of that. This is true that Sunset Valley is special and Sunset Valley is unique. So I think that we need to be open and we need to be with all the environment, and plants, they are part of the environment, in my opinion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I apologize, I hit that one twice to get it started. Okay, our next question is question number 13. And question number 13 is, what are your plans for the lowlands? And Rose, you get to start on this one, please. And I'll start the timer now. Rose, can you hear me? Rose? Uh-oh. Yeah, not hearing you.
She's self. There you go.
Yep.
Yeah, we got you now. You ready?
It was allowing me to unmute.
Okay. You're good to go.
Question of the 22 questions we got, congratulations to whoever submitted it. It threw me off. I have no idea what the lowlands are. So I'm going to, in almost 12 years of service, to not know what the lowlands are. I'm going to take a stab at this without cheating and asking other people. I don't know if this is referring to specifically owned pieces of property that are in floodplain areas. And of course, the floodplain has changed in the years since I've been on council, and I'm not sure how much that has adjusted plans or infrastructure or what we're doing with city-owned property that is in flood-prone areas. This question also could be going towards future property that the city might acquire. In either case, certainly the city shouldn't be doing any new development in any areas that are flood-prone, spending money to develop in any way. And the other thought that I had was that this might relate to the Homestead area, where there has been discussion this year, similar to the Uplands, of doing something that might bring residents into that area, in which case I would say we're at the very front end of discussing that as a community. And as far as I know, there are no plans at all that have even remotely been vetted by council. Thank you.
Thank you. Alfonso, you're next on that question.
Yes. Well, yesterday when I read that question, I say, wow, lowlands. And when I was checking, they say the lowlands is water quality zone, critical zone, or flood zone, including perhaps Hoover Creek or Homestead area. So when I hear that, I say, well, yeah, this is the floodplain. So it needs to be below the floodplain. I asked my wife about the lowlands, and she said, we will go to Holland. No, they say that the lowlands here in Sunset Valley. So after that, I start focus looking the Homestead. And as everybody mentioned, it's in the heart of the business community. So we have, in that place is the center for that business community. And we have to look at this moment that environmental aspects and legal aspects. And if we will cover that, it's amazing. It's amazing, that place, because I think then the location is critical for us. And I was in other places where we have also flooding. So I had that experience. And I think that here, if that is working, because it's critical, the environment, this is unique here. So if we will pass that and the legal aspects, I think that we need to go with that lowlands.
Okay, thank you. Rob, your choice.
I was just as stumped as Rose on this, and Alfonso. I had never heard of the upper Cougar Creek known as be called the lowlands before, so I simply had to ask. And so I think there's a couple questions about this area actually, and there's currently some research being done. I think there was like $30,000 that was put into doing an environmental study, a legal study, and then maybe put together some drawings for how it could be developed. Again, I'll say, like, my personal preference is that I do see value in undeveloped land. I think it's like, not to use an overused term, but I think it's good for like your soul just to like get away from, constant city sprawl. And I think it's also valuable as a buffer between the commercial district and the people that live in the villas. But as it stands, we're about to do some research into developing it. Some of the drawings I've seen have been fairly tasteful. And again, we also have Ampersand working on kind of a marketing positioning view for the city that can really shine some light on how the lowlands can be developed.
Okay, thank you. Next question is question number 2. Question number 2. From the conversations, I believe that the administration in Sunset Valley has become less willing to accept citizen input even before the time of COVID, and the challenges of the pandemic have just made matters worse. What in detail will you do as a council member to counter the authoritarian tendencies that have cropped up, increase transparency, and create a more open city government for the residents of Sunset Valley? Alfonso, you go first on this one.
Well, I think that in this area, the city started this year with a very, very nice program, Open Government. With Open Government only, then I can see some, they can do some improvements. The improvements that I can see is we need to go with the citizens with one approach and everybody understand. Because you can have a good information, you can present that information, but the people, they don't buy that. So we have to prepare the people, and in that way, when they say transparency, and we have to deliver that with easy understanding. So that information that the people they have, they need to be easy to digest. That is very, very important. And it's no criticism, but I start, because I hear almost all city council meetings, and I am sitting there 3 hours, and I can speak only 4 minutes as a citizen. And I can hear somebody there that they spend minutes and minutes and minutes in the staff and in the city council. It's good that they are talking, but we need to participate. This is a meeting. We meet community with leaders. So what I will be doing, I will inspire that we need to be open and we need to provide information that is easy to digest for all the public. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Rob, you're next on this question.
Sure. So in my professional capacity, in my professional capacity, I'm often advising clients that there's value in doing feature research and design before development. It is orders of magnitude cheaper to do it that way than to find out that something didn't work, to do all the work towards it and then get it out there and find out that everyone hates it. I kind of see that happening in the city. I was researching something else, and I went back to a city council meeting back in January, and I was scrubbing through trying to find the agenda item that I was looking for, and I happened to stop on one citizen comment, and the 5 seconds that I listened to in that position was someone that felt like the city was moving to develop land without having enough community input, and that was 10 months ago. So I feel like we need professional and unbiased surveys administered by a third party, though the subjects of those need to be determined by our city committees that are filled with volunteers who love the city, and the city staff needs to be consulted with those committee, need to advise in those committee meetings. All that needs to be filtered up into city council where it can then be voted upon.
Okay, thank you, Rob. Okay, Rose. You're next.
So I disagree with the resident who submitted the question. I don't think that there are authoritarian tendencies within our city, and I think those are pretty extreme words. And so I would first say that I just disagree with that. I do believe in there's always room to increase transparency. There's always room to increase and have a more open government. This year, we took leaps and bounds in creating OpenGov, which allows residents, as many as possible, to not just provide comments in advance that council has time to very timely read and digest, and even potentially call the resident, have a conversation with them. It's public, it's part of the record. And the residents who post those can do it in a way where they can really formulate their words in a way that's much harder to do when you're on the spot at the podium with the timer on. That being said, the resident then still has a second chance to come up and speak for 4 minutes during citizen comments and an additional 4 minutes on every single agenda item. Just like council members, just like the mayor, just like staff. The more prepared a resident is coming into a meeting, the more opportunity they have to participate. If council doesn't feel like it's sufficient or ready, or as I
Rose, we lost you there.
they can always pitch it back to the committee or to staff. And so that's where you have to trust your council to not take a vote on something if they feel like there is a highly contentious issue where there hasn't been enough input, or where the input brings up the reality that we need to ask more questions or send it back to committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, Rose, when I stopped it, it restarted the timer, so I used my other timer for that one. Okay, our next question. So Rob, you'll be first on this one, is question 21. In the event of another COVID type disclosure, shutting down retail, what would be your first step in dealing with revenue loss? A, lay off or fire staff. B, cut programs and rebates. C, charge for existing subsidized services. D, create a city tax for residential and commercial.
Okay. So as far as someone's
Yeah, we got you.
So as far as A goes, staff has already been cut down to a skeleton crew where I feel like it's almost dangerously short-staffed. So there's not much more room there. So I would pretty much take that one right off the table. As far as B and C goes, in economics, they say that, you tax behavior you want to curb and subsidize behavior that you want to promote. So I feel like heavily subsidized water usage in in an area that, you know, sometimes has droughts and limited water, is probably an easy one to, not easy, you know, individually, but it is probably one that makes more sense out of the four. So I would probably start there by removing subsidies, especially for situations that are just like things that you want to curb naturally anyway. After that, cutting programs and rebates, it would be very tough, but those are usually things that we want to promote anyway. And so that's what makes it difficult. But, you know, depending on how deep, you know, our finances are in arrears, that's, you know, where you want to go. I feel like D is so much of a last resort that it's practically not even an option. There are certain citizens that don't take a benefit from any of the others, and it's not their fault. It's not their fault.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Rob. And it was good you had a few more seconds there because we had trouble in the beginning. Alfonso?
Yes. With respect to this question, I think that in any business that you have, always you need to have a plan. And when you have a plan, I think that almost we have one, because what is the plan that I can see? We don't have money, and because we don't have money, we will take one of these decisions. Well, no, we have some contingency money. We have some 1 year of money, then we save. This is a reserves. You cannot cut employees. The employees, they are an asset. You create that group of people. So that kind of situation, you cannot have that. Subsidies. The subsidies, they are for all the citizens. So you cannot go to cut that subsidies or cut service. When you cut service and programs, a lot of people is involved and you create more problems. And city tax, this is something that we have. So again, we need to have a plan, and that plan, then we have the citizens and we participate, and with the citizens, we consult. We have to improve consulting the public, not taking decisions because we don't participate. So again, contingency. Thank you.
Okay. And Rose, I apologize. I took you out of sequence there. And
That's okay.
so we'll get you next, and then you will lead off on the next one.
Okay, so this is a trick question. The answer is none of the above. The council should never, pandemic, crisis, an emergency that isn't even related to something as completely unforeseen as what we dealt with this year. The answer is never to immediately cut or change something. So the first thing that needs to happen is council should look to staff, experts, and I actually, unless something were to change, and this is a hypothetical that exists many years in the future, we don't currently have room to cut fat in staff. But if we make the mistake that we made leading into 2019, which is we allowed our staff to become completely bloated, which was something that the Budget and Finance Committee had been discussing for years. They had done long-term projections, and they knew that there was absolutely no way that a city this size could retain the amount of full-time staff that we had. It absolutely made no sense. So hopefully future councils don't make that same mistake. But when it comes to making any extreme cut, whether it's implementing taxes, cutting subsidies, the first thing that should happen is we should look to staff for a recommendation and then allow council to deliberate and take action. Thank you.
Thank you, Rose. And you saw some of the feedback. I'm going to mute my mic now after I ask the questions, just to help compensate for that. Hopefully it's not mine. Okay, our next question is question number 1, and we'll get back on sequence here. This will start with Rose, then Alfonso, and then Rob. So the question is, do you feel the city of Austin has a homeless crisis? And should the city of Sunset Valley become more involved in addressing the issue?
I don't think that it's a crisis because it's not something that crept up. I think that City of Austin created a problem in the last 2 years. I think they took something that needed to be fixed through money and planning, and they made some huge strides backwards, and we have seen the negative effect of that. I definitely think that in the next 2 years, City of Sunset Valley should take steps to work with City of Austin and to really make sure that we clean up not just South Austin, but all of Austin, which requires money and planning to make sure that the people who need, whether it's medical, mental health, or family care, get the triage and assistance that they need, and that we create some sort of a permanent system to allow those who have the ability to get back on their feet into permanent housing, that we do that. I think Mayor Adler may have looked to California, but if there are many cities and states that have done an excellent job of figuring out how to manage and triage their homeless population in a way that not only gets them off the street, which is unsafe and unsanitary, certainly not humane. So anybody who thinks giving a hand wash station or a shower to somebody under a bridge is a solution, it's not. I do think there's a problem. I do think Sunset Valley in the next two years should not just work with Austin, but force Austin to do more to clean up the homeless population.
Thank you, Rose. Alfonso, you're next.
Well, homeless is a very sensitive topic because in my mind, we need to treat these people with dignity. I believe that the city of Austin was lack of affordable housing, and that gave it to them a problem. After reading, they say that they are over 2,200 homeless in Austin. And if we have that amount of people, and these people now, when they have more the open camping, they are more visible. And sometimes we have that kind of problems. In our case, our police, they report some incidents that they have. But it's our responsibility to protect our residents, visitors, and properties in Sunset Valley. I believe that we need to increase our communication with the police and the authorities of the city of Austin. But that is coming from our leaders. Our leaders, they need to do a little more effort to communicate. It's a small city, but we can do a lot. And we trust that people with dignity.
Thank you. Rob, your turn, please.
Sure. I actually think it's quite obvious that Austin is in the midst of a homelessness crisis. To have a problem with the word crisis, I mean, is kind of not seeing the problem for what it is. There's many cities that are going through this before travel restrictions. You know, I was in Los Angeles, San Francisco, Seattle, Vancouver, and many cities on the East Coast, and every city has a large number of homeless population. It is a problem that is, unfortunately or fortunately for us, outside of the scope of what Sunset Valley can do. Salt Lake City just simply built homeless people houses, and I don't really see that being an appetizing thing in many places outside of Salt Lake City. Anyway, so Sunset Valley has limited space and finances to make a truly meaningful impact. But when we do interact with, our homeless citizens, we have a chance to kind of make their life maybe a little bit easier. Unfortunately, because of the size of our staff, it falls to our police sometimes to have to interact with the homeless population, and the police have enough on their plates already. I commend their community policing approach and hope that they continue to help homeless people access Austin City resources when they need them. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. Okay, our next question is question number 5. And as I mentioned in the mayoral conversations, this is a large question. So I will read the last part, and the folks that are participating can see the entire question on the screen. This is a 2-part question. First, if elected in the future, would you be willing to commit to a fully visible form of Meet the Candidates? with live virtual questions should the situation necessitate. Second, and more importantly on an ongoing basis, if elected, would you commit to all council meetings being fully visible? So our beginning this, Alfonso, you are the first speaker on this one.
Okay, for the first, I will say yes. I would like to be visible. For me, when I was small, when I was a baby, I remember my family and they used to hear the radio. Now, when we have the TV, we were more happy because we were looking people. So when we meet, when we have these meetings, it's nice to see people. We are not looking, only talking with one monitor. And meet again is to communicate. So sometimes the expression that we have with our face, with our body, is part of that communication. So this is why I support in both ways. Yes, we need to be visible. We need to be visible because the people, if we say that we trust in the people, this is part of the trusting, that we are open to them. And when we are open to them, in good and bad days, we need to show that. Today I was very, very sick since last night, but I tried to be here, and you don't believe. I am watching at this moment Rosie, Rob, you, Tom, and I am happy. If I will be only watching the monitor, I will be more sick.
Thank you, Alfonso. Rob, you're next on this one, please.
Sure. I plan on being visible in city council meetings. You know, I'm in meetings all day, and I use a variety of video conferencing software, and it's usually up to the person's preference whether they want to get on or not. And I definitely, I understand if certain people don't want to be on camera. There's a bit of fatigue that goes through it, but I have to agree with Alfonso. There's a little bit of an interpersonal communication benefit to being able to see others. The last city council meeting that I listened to, it was quite heated, and I don't know, I feel like if we could have seen each other, maybe we would have just taken a breath and been able to kind of come together. Anyway, my platform strikes pretty hard on deliberative and thoughtful decision making. So the part about like extemporaneous answers being important, I don't think it's indicative of being a good city council member. And towards transparency, like we were given these questions ahead of time. I thought it was important to be prepared and to be able to reflect on the questions before I dove directly into them. So thank you.
Thank you, Rob. It's going to take me a few minutes since I'm now muting myself to get back and forth, or a few seconds. So Rose, it's your turn. Nope.
Unmuted.
There, thank you, whoever unmuted it. Yes, absolutely. And the easy solution is we go back to City Hall. In the event that we were actually going to be, say, a tech company where you have people that are bi-coastal or who are working from home, if we were actually going to be a city council that created a structure where everybody is online, then the solution is you create a proper process where we have to consider things like, does everybody have the ability to be in a room? My house has an office. The office is open to the kitchen. I have 2 little kids, age 4 and 5, 3 dogs. No, I can't turn my camera on. Most of the meetings over the last few months, I'm either in my master bedroom or I'm in my master closet, sitting on the floor under my clothes next to a clothesbin. No, you shouldn't force anybody to have to put that on camera. This has become somewhat of a humiliation question that I've seen come up a few times, as if it indicates somebody's not honest, transparent, or working hard enough if they're not on camera. That's just not true. So I think the solution is, yes, get back to City Hall, and if for some reason we can't, then we create a proper procedure so that, like tonight, people have an option where if you can't do that at home, you do have the ability to use a city resource to film from. Thank you.
Thank you, Rose. Our next question is question number 6. What capital improvement plans are needed for the city? And Rob, you'll lead off on this one.
Sure. City staff had been tasked with providing a prioritized recommendation list of projects that need improving. I think insufficient funding of infrastructure maintenance is a national issue, but it plays out all around us all the time. And I believe that the city should. I've seen the document. They are ranked. It's very clear. There are a lot of number ones in there, and I feel confident that all of those should be tackled. All of the high priorities projects should be tackled before we start embarking on any new projects. I'm kind of in favor of taking care of what you've already done before you move on to something else. There are other questions that we have that are around impervious cover and issues with kind of our retention ponds and stuff like that. And I think it's quite telling how this question ties in with some of the questions that we're going to get later about impervious cover and other infrastructure that is meant to deal with water issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. Rose, you're next on this one.
So one thing council realized in the last year is that the capital improvement plan that we have is outdated. So we just didn't have time as a council to get to that. So the first thing is that the police chief, city administrator, and hopefully the new public works director can update, present both at the committee level and at the council level so that we can at least have a current adopted, approved CIP plan. So without that being in place first, I don't have anything that I would propose to be prioritized or that I think isn't on that list that should be. It's really just a matter of we need to get the plan with accurate numbers. And then I would like to see us no longer be a city where we fund things that we know we're not going to work on, and instead allow our money to be invested and work for us instead of embedding it in a CIP project that we know isn't going to be executed within that fiscal year or within a fiscal year where it necessitates putting it into the operating fund. But to do that, we need a plan that the whole community can trust in. Thank you.
Sorry, Alfonso, your time.
Okay, with the CIP or capital improvements program, it's necessary. In that case, for us, you have to go first. What are your needs? What are the needs of the people that you have in your town? Do you need special trees? Streets? You need to work with your streets. You need to work with your utility service. You need to work with your drainage. We need to find what is our needs of the city with the people. After you have all of that, you need to start organizing. You need to start having meetings with the community. You need to decide what is in reality what do they need? The staff and the leaders, they need to be together. We need to hire somebody. In the experience that I had, we used to have facilitators, and the facilitators they help us organize. After we organize and prioritize that information, each project, we put the projects in areas according with the time goals. Some of them 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, and 20 years. After that, we allocate the costs and we develop some financial plans. So in this case, it's important. Our streets, it doesn't have one plan. Our utilities doesn't have a plan. So we need to develop that urgently.
Thank you, Alfonso.
Thank
Our
you.
next question is question number 12. Will you support excluding political signs from sign ordinance enforcement 90 days before the election until the election is over? And Rose, you go first on this one. Rose, are you good to go?
Yes, sorry, everything was frozen for a minute. Yes, I'm back
Okay,
on.
good. Did you hear the question?
Oh, no, I didn't hear the question. Sorry, I couldn't hear no, I didn't hear a question.
Okay, that's all fine. Will you support excluding political signs from the sign ordinance enforcement 90 days before the election until the election is over?
That is a loaded question that involves political speech and city property. So should council revisit what is the right of way? Certainly in the meadows and the villas, I can't imagine why we would want to push out the small city right of way to extend close to the curb. But in other parts of the city, I recently learned just in the last 2 weeks that the right of way can range from 15 to 20 feet. So maybe for those streets, it would make sense to move and allow some portion farther away from the street. But that would be something that council would need to review and would also involve input from the residents that live on each of those streets and would then involve a change in ordinance. But without any of that, no, I definitely think that the city right of way should actually be free of as much, if not all, non-city signage as possible, because we live in a really beautiful city that has some really beautiful properties. And I would like for residents to be able to maintain the natural beauty of the streets to the extent possible and not have anybody's personal property be in the right of way. Thank you.
Thank you, Rose. And Alfonso, you're next for this question.
Okay, if I support, yes, I support that for 90 days. Now, I believe again that planning and consultation is not the proper way than the staff was dealing with the public. Why? If we know that we have election time, I think that the city council and the staff, they need to bring that to the public. We know that we have rules. We need to obey the rules. That's critical. But in the way that in this case, after the fact, you see all of that explanation in open government, that is not transparency. That is, again, something that the public, they took as offense. Because if you give it to them first, all of that nice information, you decide that in city council, then you will do some moratorium to that ordinance. The people, they will understand, that they will discuss, again, lack of planning and consultation. Thank you.
Thank you, Alfonso. Rob, your turn, please.
Sure. I was quite sympathetic to the city administrator's situation. Yeah, the staff is bound to follow the rules that have been passed, regardless of how lax enforcement has been in the past. And everyone's favorite ordinance is someone else's least favorite ordinance, and it's just not a way to kind of like run a city. We live close to Jones, well, directly next to Jones, and because it's kind of busier up here, we're made more aware of the right of way, and the city mows it, and we always keep out of the right of way just to make their job a little bit easier. Before I even knew that was like a rule, but when the sidewalk went in, we were more educated about the rules around right of way. I'm open to getting something more formal on the books when it comes to political signs during election years because of how important those decisions are. But, it becomes a slippery slope. Potentially, you might have your roofing sign out there and then that you're selling cookies or that you're doing this and you're doing that. So I think we definitely need to come together as a community to kind of decide what we want the rules to be in around that. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. Our next question is question 11. What are the effects of complying or not complying with impervious cover regulations downstream? And Alfonso, you go first on this one.
Oh, okay. Okay, impervious cover. We need to understand that we are in a watershed. And the watershed means that you have a basin. And in that basin, by gravity, the water will be moving from the up downstreams. When you have something that is impermeable, the water cannot infiltrate. So the water will go run over. In this case, the watershed that we are is the Williamson Creek for the city of Austin. So in that Williamson Creek, we are in the up part, the up part. So that part will finish in Westgate. And later you have a second part of the Williamson Creek. So what happened? At this moment, the percent impervious cover from all of that area is below 20%. The city with 18%, what is doing? It's protecting the environment. It's not only protecting above our land. We are happy and we enjoy because how that looks. And now our water quality, part of the water will go to the Edwards Aquifer and over to the Barton Spring. We need to protect that.
Thank you, Alfonso. Rob, you're next.
Sure. I was hoping Alfonso would go first because like this is his world. And anyway, so you know, we're part of an ecosystem, and no raindrop thinks that it causes the flood, but the fact is that water that cannot re-enter the soil and go down into the aquifer, it just turns into flooding, and then that flooding becomes like another thing that is used to sometimes complain to the government about. It's like, why didn't you protect us from this flooding? It's like, well, you know, this first domino up here affects this domino over here. Also, the floodwater that enters the streams is often polluted because it wasn't able to go through like nature's natural filtering system, and that ends up, as Alfonso pointed out, it ends up with a polluted town lake where, you know, we have, you know, barely any fish and brain-eating diseases for dogs and something that you would never even want to swim in. And so, yeah, I think it's very important that we protect impervious cover. It is not, I don't think it's as big of a hardship here due to our large lot sizes. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. Rose, your turn.
It's negative. So there's sort of three different areas of negativity and not following our own ordinances. In this particular area, it relates to water quality. So you end up with a higher negative impact to water quality, but also it relates to degradation of property downstream. So you want to make sure that new development upstream isn't negatively affecting existing structures downstream. And then the third negative to it is when you have ordinances that allow for a variance process, it creates inconsistency in how the rule itself is applied. And that's where I see the biggest issue in Sunset Valley that we need to work on as a community, and specifically council, is to better understand what's the spirit and intent of our variance process. Because if really what we're saying is there is a rule, however, we're not going to follow it, and we're not going to follow it consistently with every single person who develops or redevelops, that becomes the problem, because you have an 18% rule, but then if you look at both residential and commercial, you see that 18% is being applied inconsistently, which then begs the question, are we really assessing on a scientific level what that negative impact is to water quality and also to structures downstream? Thank you.
Thank you, Rose. Rob, you'll be first on this question, and it's question 14. What do you feel about the possibility of our new marketing firm coming up with a city brand that some or many citizens do not relate to, but will draw customers?
Okay. A few weeks ago, we had a council and the candidates were invited to a meeting, and obviously all citizens were invited to a meeting with Emerson and Canales & Co. to go over their process. They laid out their dynamic insights process and their use of marketing questionnaires. I was really impressed and have confidence that they'll weigh citizen input properly. There's a lot of places for citizens to have input along the way. And then even once the proposal is done, it doesn't become law. There will be more places for citizens to deliberate about it along with city council. That said, I don't think I'm willing to sell out Sunset Valley values for a little bit increased sales tax revenue. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. Rose, you're next on this one. Rose?
Thank you.
Got it.
So I can pretty much guarantee this is similar to the comment Rob made earlier about one person's ordinance that they love and want enforced will be the ordinance that another person despises. I can't imagine a situation where we're going to have a marketing concept that is loved by 100% of residents. So I think we can count on some people not liking it. But as a community, I would hope that we would embrace the process, the professionals that have been selected, and as we move forward in the process, agree as a community that ultimately we're going to allow council to vote and make decisions so that our money is well invested and so that we can get the benefit of the marketing plan that is much needed, much overdue, especially based on the impact that our commercial district took this year. Thank you.
Thank you, Rose. Alfonso, your turn.
I hear the meeting when that company, that marketing company, they show up, and I think then the participation of the public will be necessary, and will be necessary because when we are talking about the brand of the city, that is so important. When they are talking about city of Austin, then they are wares and the capital of the world. How we want to see ourselves? We don't want that they will say, come to the city of Sunset Valley and you don't pay taxes. It's a city chip. No. As a marketing, I think that our city has other environmental values, and people then needs to show up and start looking the art that they have. We have people that they have that values, and people that was working with this economical development for years. Was until last year when it started moving a little more and they put more attention. And now with this pandemic, we have that. It's important what will be the brand, very, very critical, because perhaps will be a gym. This is the jewel that we have. This place is a jewel in Austin. So something in that way. This is how I think.
Thank you, Alfonso. Our next question is question number 9, and Rose will begin with this one. Question 9 is, why is respecting the 18% impervious cover so important?
I would reverse the answer I gave to the last one. It's important because you don't want to invite those negative impacts to structures, infrastructure, and water quality. And then also you want to have integrity to your ordinances and more specifically your variance process. And I would, if I had to pick one thing to highlight and harp on for the future council, it would be make sure you're not giving variances to everybody without having an understanding of who, what, when, where, why, what is the logic behind those variances that you're offering? Because if you don't provide the breadcrumb trail, it becomes very hard for future councils to understand. The predicament that council members feel oftentimes is the pressure of if somebody asks a question, you feel obligated to give an answer. And that's oftentimes what happens with the variance process. The person, the applicant is there asking for it, they feel entitled to it. But if our 18% impervious cover doesn't have integrity, it then begs the question, does it have value? Does it have purpose? And I would hope that as a community, we say, yes, it does, which means we need to follow the ordinance and have an integrity built variance process. Thank you.
Thank you, Rose. Alfonso, you're next, please.
Why we need to respect the 18%? Perhaps the people, they don't know, all our citizens, then in our town, we have two creeks, the Williamson Creek and one deviation of the Williamson Creek, that is Cougar Creek. So you have two creeks and they pass through the city. So when you have two creeks and the water is coming, you have water quality zones. And that water quality zones, they allow only some percent of development. So the people, they don't know too much. Now, if at this moment, our land, our marketing land, our business land is taking a lot on the north of the town, we have to conserve and we have to preserve the other part. Because if we start not checking and preventing, what will be the safety that we'll have downstream? The flooding. At this moment, we start with problems. And when that will come, the new rules of 411 will be worse. At this moment, we work with a 100 years rain. We will start now change to 500. So that raise 1 or 2 feet of water. So this is why we need to respect that. I hope that the staff, okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Alfonso. Okay, Rob, you're next.
Sure. Lisa Versace today, one of our fellow residents, was just passing around the study where the 18% is laid out. It is thick. I didn't get a chance to read it. I just barely got through all the reference material for it. But as we spoke about a couple questions ago, I think it's quite obvious why we want to limit impervious cover, because it helps with flooding and helps prevent polluted water getting down into our vital waterways. I think there's a place where we can really educate our citizens around why impervious cover regulations are important. I always say education and empathy goes a long way, and understanding why people are concerned and then helping them understand the science is important. Something that was mentioned by Rose was about like poor enforcement. I get that sometimes it can feel unfair when it seems to be enforced differently. As with the barn trying to change their impervious cover, I felt like you're not doing your future right by continuing to just approve variances over and over again. And you have to stop somewhere. And unfortunately, it's like that one was the one. That one is not decided, but there you go. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. Okay, our next question is question number 20. And Alfonso, you'll lead off on this one. What will you do to enhance and protect city property? Alfonso, you're first.
Okay, with city property, the city has over 200 acres of open space, green space. 200 acres is a lot. I think that the first duty for us is to protect all of that environment. In that environment, it's not only plants, it's also vegetables, animals, We have so many things there that we have to protect. And also we have people. So in that case, in that protection, we need to do maintenance. At this moment, we are looking what happened in California with the fire. We need to take that in consideration ourselves. So we don't put too much attention with fire protection. And we have so much area, then it can create a problem. So in my opinion, we need to have a real plan, but effective, that we need to be active, cleaning and doing maintenance, and study which areas they have some potential effect with the community, because we don't want to have some of that kind of things. This is how we can protect that city property. In addition, the police is working very good at this moment, because also they go and they are checking, and the volunteers. Boss, okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Alfonso. Rob, you're next, please.
Sure. I'm currently happy with the share of wild land and trail accessible land and commercial and residential and everything. I'm in favor of protecting overall that balance. That's been clear with many of my answers so far tonight. I want to focus a little bit more on the enhancing of city property. As far as how it's zoned, it may not be considered city property, but there was a question about the aging of the shopping districts and what can we do to kind of spiff them up. And it was mentioned that the management companies may not be too interested in, as long as rent is being paid, then they might not be too interested in investing any money. However, we're the ones that have to look at it, and we're the ones that want to promote ourselves as kind of like a very cool place to live and to shop and everything else. So I'd be willing to take some of our city funds that might be going to other new projects and kind of putting that money into revitalizing the existing shopping districts. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. Rose, your turn, please.
Muted.
Thank you. I agree that I currently feel happy with the balance that we have between shopping, residential, green space. The city has quite a bit of space. In fact, it'll be on the next agenda where we're going to look at a chart created by staff that highlights the green space, because many residents, including myself and other elected officials, we think of the trail space, we think of certain areas behind City Hall, but there actually are other properties that the city owns, including one that's on Brody Lane. And so there will be a time where we have to decide, do we create some sort of a community use for that, a park, a place for families to play. At one point, I remember there were residents that suggested that we maybe have a soccer field, which wouldn't cost a lot of money for the city to create or have a long-term impact in terms of water quality. So I do think that there's a balance of improving, but I don't think that we necessarily need to change the percentage of what categories we have. The Violet Crown Trail coming in with another trailhead at Home Depot, it will be interesting to see how our city incorporates that. And absolutely, hands down, anything we can do to assist the process of improving the commercial district, I think we as a city should embrace that and participate and encourage it. Thank you.
Thank you, Rose. Thank you, Rose. We will have one or two more questions, so we leave enough time at the end of the 90 minutes for your closing statements. So we'll see how we go on these next two. Rob, you'll lead off on this one. And the next question is question number 19. How should the uplands be used? Rob,
Sure.
You have the floor.
Okay, thank you. So I've been thinking, I think it was the first question where we started to talk about that property, and I've been thinking about Rose's response to that ever since. I recognize that there has been discussion within city council meetings. But there's also discussion that I've heard just as I like walk around and talk to people. And between decisions that have been made at the city level and what I hear on the street, I mean, it's not quite clear that there is a consensus, and maybe our neighbors need to be better informed about what the city wants to do, or maybe the city needs to learn or listen more to what the people want by getting them more involved. I'm not sure how to strike that balance, but like, it's definitely something that I feel. You know, if something absolutely must be done with that property, the farmer's market is currently right there. I think, again, this is, if I had to do something, but again, after deliberation, I think it would make a fine home for the farmer's market. We can put a pavilion so that it could be for inclement weather, a little bit better band shell, but again, like, maintain much of the tree growth and wild space that is there, because it could be like a pretty pristine location for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. Rose, you're next.
But we need to move forward with the progress we've made as a community. It certainly isn't, no decisions have been made on a council level, but it has been a 10+ year trek. And for residents who've participated on the various committees, P&E, and on council, there definitely has been, certainly not consensus, but a majority of the community has said, figure out a way to both develop it, monetize it, but do it in a way that is sensitive to a community need. And so we should not give up or abandon the progress that we've made over the last 10 years. And we should find a way to utilize it that blends with our marketing firm. And again, the best idea that I've been able to throw into the hopper was the idea of a farm to market restaurant, where we would have a small farm, a co-op farm of some sort that produces food for a restaurant, where you also potentially have, whether it's a boutique hotel or some sort of commercial retail, while also providing some amount of community space. Again, remembering that whatever we develop, there's a portion of it that we then take on the cost and burden of maintaining. And so there also has to be that balance of, to what extent do we want somebody else to put money into it, and to what extent do we want to spend money? What I don't want it to be is a fenced off piece of property for the homeless or for trash to be collected along the fence. I'd like for us to do something better with that property. Thank you.
Thank you, Rose. Alfonso?
Okay. I will say that at this moment, right now, we need to be very, very careful with our expenditures. So we don't have at this moment the way to expend that money, because we don't have that. Again, the city is lucky to have that land. When I say that they are almost 9 acres, it's a lot of land and good location. We had studies that they made in 2017, excellent studies. They gave it to us a lot of ways how we can use that place. Again, the community, not necessarily all the communities agree. So we continue with some no misunderstanding, because everybody knows what do they want. Some people, they don't want to do nothing. Some people, they want to sell that. In my case, I don't sell that. We're purchasing $1.3 million. At this moment, it's almost $6 million. So the value was higher. I think that we can use a multi-use place, and we need to have the people. But now we need to be very careful with expenditures. I hope that we will fix that soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Alfonso. And we have time for one more question, so we'll do that and then go to your closing statements. The final question is question number 17, and I will read that in total. Let me just stop the timer here. Some people design and maintain the exterior of their homes if they were featured on HGTV. Other people use a more creative approach to their color choices in landscaping to express their individuality. Other people have higher priorities than watering daily and mowing their lawn every other week. Do you think that the attractiveness of our neighborhoods should be regulated? And if so, how? Rose, you go first on this one.
Thank you. Well, we have the Meadows as an example of what that looks like, and that works well for them and the residents who've chosen to live in a neighborhood with an HOA and with such regulations. My opinion is that you can't regulate style and aesthetics, because a color I love is a color my neighbor hates. So I can't imagine a situation where council could get in the position of having, say, an architectural board or some sort of a style and aesthetic approval process that applies. But I agree with the sentiments in that question that for some people, landscaping is important, and for other families, that just isn't a priority for the family. My preference would not be to try and regulate that, but instead to try to regulate and maybe even encourage and create more programs where we incentivize residents to do, such as when we did the Xeriscape program years back, which I participated in, where if you took your grass up, you got a rebate for xeriscaping. But to try to regulate colors and style, I can't imagine that going over well in the older parts of town or even in the villas. Thank you.
Thank you. Alfonso, your comments, please.
Yes. When we are talking to regulate, my family and I, we were living in two different neighborhoods. One where we have all the freedom. And I remember then I purchased 120 plants and I put outside, and was also pretty for me. That was attractive, my house with all of that flowers. I went to another place where I couldn't do nothing. When I started putting some rocks, they came and they say, do you know that the rules here, they say that for 20 years, you cannot have nothing. Needs to be in that way. Well, I don't want a homeowners association. I would like to have my house with some personality. This is the way. I think that the word attractiveness is different for different interpretations. In my case, I like to have that freedom. I don't believe that we will have a city that will enforce how that needs to be, the colors and the weight of the plants. That would be personality. And this city, I think, it has that neighbors. If we will say Meadows, it's nice Meadows because it's isolated. You can go inside and it's some group of houses and they look pretty. And also you can have other houses that they have more color. So all depends. Thank you.
Rob, you're the final one.
There we go. Well, as Rose said, there's no accounting for taste, right? I believe the aircraft hangar at 6 Reese was one of the first times that there was some design that tried to be like impressed upon everyone, that said like, you can't have that. Your outbuildings need to look like your home and has to be made of this and that material. So, our goal whenever we make changes to our house is, we want to be happy, but we want to make sure that Tammy, the Flores family, and Miriam are happy, and we don't cause them any issues. I know not everyone works that way, but it's really important for us to get along with our neighbors in that way. After that, as long as you're working within the building code, it's actually quite fun to walk around and see all the different houses in their designs. We have names for the houses. John and Julia's Castle House, we call it, and all the streets in the old town that we walk all the time. So it's really quite fun, and I would, as Rose said, I don't think it would go down very well if we tried to impress that. No one would really want it, and so it's a fun exercise to think about. But I think we're too expressive of a city in order to kind of run into that. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. Okay, it's time for our closing statements, and we'll go in this order: Alfonso, Rob, and Rose. So Alfonso, again, this will be 2.5 minutes. So I'll give you the 30-second warning at 2 minutes on the clock. So you have the floor, Alfonso.
Yes, thank you. I was born in a large metropolis, Mexico City, and my contact with natural environment was limited. But we always had plants, dogs, cats, birds, and plenty aquariums. Since a young age, I love water and science. Science is the language that I speak best. And I have always spoken it very loudly to advocate for the protection of the environment, both as a citizen and as a city employee. I know about managing budgets and how important they are to maintain our quality of life. Working with our commercial districts is critical because income from our retail revenue provides programs and service for residents. It pays for staff and funds reserves, all without property taxes. 2 years ago, I became a US citizen, and I was so excited to vote for the first time and to run for council. I want to thank all of you who encouraged me to run again. When you told me, Alfonso, you are dedicated and you do the homework, you have the background and the passion to serve. It means so much to me, and it inspired me to try again. I will always be involved because I want to work hard to achieve the best for the city. I am always listening and I am always learning. I read something in a resident survey that means a lot to me. It describes Sunset Valley as a little city blessed by design with the income and resources to preserve and celebrate living in harmony with green spaces, wildlife, and our protected underground water zones. I feel so lucky to live in this city. If I am lucky enough to be elected to council, I will preserve our quality of life. Thank you.
Thank you, Alfonso. Rob, you now have the floor.
Sure. Thank you again to our moderator, Tom, pardon me, and behind the scenes helpers. I see Sylvia and Matt and a couple others in there. I want to say thanks to all the citizens who spent their Tuesday with us to continue the great experiment of self-governance. Isn't it great that, you know, we have this little city and we can all be so involved? Sunset Valley is only my second home. I'm from Pennsylvania, and so my parents' house and this house, a few apartments in between, but this is like my other home. And you know, we set down roots here and we're here for the long haul. It makes me quite excited that one day my daughters grow up and they go off to college and they say, where are you from? And I don't think they're going to say Austin. They're going to say Sunset Valley. They're from Sunset Valley. They go to Sunset Valley Elementary. So, you know, I want to bring back, I want citizens to come back into the discussion. I want everyone that I talk to feel like they're being listened to. I want to bring faith back into the system. You know, any that has been lost, you know, build that faith back up. I want the people that live here and the people that are moving here to be educated about the history of Sunset Valley and why we have the rules that we have. I'd like to continue to bring further transparency into the decision-making process. I feel like sometimes that's what causes people to tune out. And I feel like if they just know me as this, like, the regular guy that lives at the corner, and all of a sudden I'm in there, then I could just say, hey, there's no magic to it. We just go in and we talk and we work it out, and, you know, why don't you come along with us? Anyway, I want to listen more to our business partners and help them prosper. Something that was great in one of the last city council meetings was the owner of Doc's Backyard came on to ask for a variance. And it was Rose that said like, hey, what else can we do for you? Brilliant. You know, we need more of that. We need more business owners to be coming into the city council to talk and let us know how that we can help out. And I want to protect our green spaces for future generations. I have a website. It's www.rob.vote. And you can also email me at hello@rob.vote if you want to follow up on anything else I've said. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. Rose, you have the floor. Try again.
I'm muted.
Thank you. I'm going to start negative and positive. So I woke up this morning to a handful of emails and phone calls from residents who were upset because a sitting council member had sent an endorsement for 3 of the candidates this evening. The discomfort that the residents expressed to me was, how did we get to this point, and why is a sitting council member ending an email with, let's get Sunset Valley back on track? With that, I don't think Sunset Valley is off track. What I do think happens is that different personalities come and go. Just like being in a church, a business, a board, even a family. We don't always get what we want when we want it. And as I said to a resident today, what I tell my little girls every day, almost every day, is where there's a will, there's a way, but that doesn't mean it will be my way. In Sunset Valley, we work well together. I don't think words like rancor, authoritarian, control. I don't want to be a fear monger in a community that I love, with residents that I care for. And as I sit here tonight and I look, Rob, just like years ago when I ran against Kenton as mayor, I am constantly throughout this evening thinking about Rob and his wife and his little girls, and they've been in my home. The city will be lucky to have him as a council member. The city would be lucky to have Alfonso as a council member for all the reasons he outlined. He's in it, and he's been fighting the fight for the last few years. So I know he's prepared. He's prepared to get in and have his microphone cut off and not get what he wants on issues. And council members come on, and if they're well seasoned, that works to their advantage, and they're disadvantaged. If you're green, that works to your advantage, it works to your disadvantage. I'm just happy that residents have choices. And I think that our city's wonderful. It's going to continue to be wonderful. And I have absolute faith in our staff, in our system, in our community, in our different neighborhoods. And I think that's a good thing. And so hopefully the takeaway tonight is that we're going to just keep getting better and keep improving the city. And the only thing that I noticed tonight, I actually think there wasn't anything that stood out as being incredibly incorrect. The one thing I would point out as your candidate is the homeless situation. I do think that there is more that we can do with both City of Austin and City of Austin City Council to influence that problem and or crisis, however we view it. And please visit my website that I put up today, rosecardona.com, so that you can see a piece of my Sunset Valley. Thank you.
On behalf of all the folks that have tuned in this evening and joined us, I want to say thank you to our city council candidates as well as to our candidates for the mayoral position. And it's been an hour and a half, so you all have spent a good amount of time answering questions, so I thank you for that very much. Everybody take care, and yes, we all absolutely love this city and are so blessed to be here. So we appreciate all your efforts as being wanted to be part of what makes it what it is today and what it will be in the future. You all take care.
Thanks,
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Tom.